Welcome back to 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Josh Doring is here with me. Josh, I strayed away. I took my eyes off the prize. I picked the Seattle Sounders to win MLS Cup, and it came back to bite me in a large way. The Crew were up 2-0 after 31 minutes. They tack on a third one in the 82nd. It was never particularly close.
Nope.
Now, it's the beauty of soccer. Seattle 65% of the possession, 13 shots to the Columbus's 15 shots, but the Crew found a way to get 3 in the back of the net. Seattle behind the 8 ball pretty much immediately in the 25th minute. If someone asked you why the Crew won, so I'm going to ask you why the Crew won this game. What's your response to that question, other than the obvious they scored more points than the other team? I don't need that from you. Why? What you're right, because they get off to an early start, but Seattle's still never able to find the back of the net, and the Crew control at least the scoreboard for all 90 minutes.
I'll give you two reasons.
Or at least
First,
65 of the 90 minutes for being technical.
Yeah. The biggest thing, which was what I put in my preview, Columbus wins this game if.
Toot your own horn a little bit there, like it.
that midfield two, which was in this game, Aiden Morris and Artur, and then the back line, the defenders behind him, Nico Lodeiro and Raul Ruidiaz were by and large nowhere to be seen. If you can stop those two guys, Lodeiro is the engine that makes Seattle go. Ruidiaz is the most prolific per game standpoint goal scorer in MLS playoff history. They deliver time and time again in the biggest moments, and they just were non-existent in this game.
Sure.
And that's a real credit to Aiden Morris, who came in as a teenager for Darlington Nagbe, who makes a living doing just that and controlling a game and taking other players out of it. And he was really, really good. He did a little bit differently, but that's the big thing. And then the other part, that the thing I couldn't believe I was watching, and it seems like this is the general consensus listening to the guys who follow this league and cover it for Major League Soccer and MLSsoccer.com talking after the game. The question I had about Columbus was, without Darlington Nagbe, can they do what they want to do? Because Caleb Porter wants to have the ball. He wants to have possession. He wants to pass it around. That's why Darlington Nagbe is so good. That's what he does. Now, they did a little bit differently because Aiden Morris is just not as good at doing that as Darlington Nagbe is. They were more direct. Aiden Morris was trying to play in transition and hit Seattle on the counter when the ball turned over more. But they were still pretty much the same team. They stuck to their philosophy. They didn't have as much possession as you alluded to, but they still wanted to play with the ball. They wanted to be ambitious. And I thought they were just going to sit back and try and hold on and get a fluke thing to happen, or a deflection, free kick, penalty, something, and try and just hit Seattle on the counter. And they were much more expansive, but they were really, really good still. It was, and that's mainly because Lucas Celerion was
phenomenal,
so good. That's the lesson here is, hey, every Major League Soccer team, if you just spend a little bit of money to go get a really, really good game-breaking player, you can win this whole thing. The margins are that slim. There's that much parity. That little bit of money can go an incredibly long way. Just ask Columbus.
I thought, and right, me talking about soccer like I genuinely know what I'm talking about is not the best thing for anybody here. But me and my relatively elementary understanding of the sport, at least from an analytical level, was that, I mean, both goals in the first 31 minutes were just far too easy in terms of pressure that was being put on Columbus's goal scorers to actually finish under pressure. I mean, the first one was just a really beautiful cross that landed right on somebody's foot and was converted. Sometimes you just can't do anything about that. But specifically the second one, I mean, he was standing right in the middle of the box essentially and just had plenty of time to stutter step into it and put a foot on it. And when you're playing at this level of the sport, the goals looked too easy, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you what they were doing that made it look so easy, but there wasn't nearly enough pressure on goal scorers, at least from those first 2 goals.
Yeah, definitely not. And Zelerion had time to just pick them apart.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other part of this too. I think you're right. You can look at the goals, but just generally speaking, he was just sitting there in between Seattle's holding midfielders in their back line, and that's where guys like him thrive.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's his space, because he's so good with the ball at his feet, because he's such a good passer, because he can score goals by himself, as you saw in this game. It was a question, and that's really been the theme throughout these playoffs, is whose big time players show up and perform better.
Mm-hmm.
It's why Minnesota got as far as they did. It's why Seattle ultimately beat Minnesota, is because Ruidíaz and Lodeiro came to life in the second half. It's why the Crew won this game, is because Zelerion was far and away the best player on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why New England made a run as far as they did, is because until they got to Columbus, Gustavo Bo and Carlos Hill were the best players on the field.
Mm-hmm.
It's why I had questions about the Union, because they don't have that guy. But it's also why and this is the other thing that I sort of talked about in my 5 things from the week. It's also why the Union won the Supporters Shield, is because Columbus lost Nagbe and Zelerion for a stretch at the end of the regular season. And guess what? They weren't very good.
Uh-huh.
The Union don't have that one guy where you go, oh, they're in trouble if they lose him. They have more and less important players, but it's the strength of the collective.
Mm-hmm.
So I was so happy to see Columbus, because I really thought for most of the season they were the best team in the league.
That was my next question. Is that, do you think, right, and you've talked about this before, that you think that in most cases the best team from the sport that season wins the Supporters Shield, but doesn't always win MLS Cup. From the way you've been talking and what I've read, I think that this has been one of those years where the best team, at least one of the best teams, didn't win the MLS Cup, but then the most talented, the well-built team was the one that ultimately won MLS Cup in the end.
Yeah, it's the same thing as the NCAA tournament, right?
Right.
There are
conference regular season and conference tournament champions.
Maybe that's the better comparison, right? That the top couple teams, the top team,
mm-hmm.
who your deserving 1 seeds are in the NCAA tournament.
Right.
But fluky things can happen. That's what MLS Cup is, which makes it that much more incredible what the Sounders have done. But you look at this thing sort of from start to finish. Columbus was great at MLS's back. They happened to lose in the shootout to Minnesota, who was also a very good team. It happens. They came back. They were winning the Supporters Shield race for most of the season, and then Nagbe and Zelerion got hurt, and they fell off a cliff, and the Union just kept winning, and Toronto got going because they got healthy, or at least had some players coming back, and then they got hurt at the end, and the Union just kept going because they had a couple injuries here or there, but they were much more intact than everybody else, and their team is built with better depth anyway. I feel very, very confident saying that at full strength, and not even full strength, because that's the other part of this that the Crew now have going for them in terms of this argument that they were deserving champions and were from start to finish the best team in this league, is you take both Nagbe and Zelerion out, they're nowhere near the best team in the league. But they proved that they can beat anybody with one of them. That was the interesting test we hadn't seen yet, is what does this team look like with healthy Zelerion but not Nagbe? And they looked really good.
That looks really good.
I am thoroughly convinced, in a way that I usually am not, that at full strength, with all of the pieces, they were the best team in this league. They just weren't always able to show it because two of their 2 most important players weren't there for a stretch. And again, in a condensed season where you're playing 23 games, not 34, it becomes much harder to prove that. They very well may have caught the Union, or at least made it interesting for the Supporters Shield, if they would have had another 11 games with Zelerion and Nagbe. They got him back at the end of the regular season. It took a game or 2 to sort of get their rhythm back, and then they came out of the better conference far and away in a pretty convincing fashion, and then they destroyed the Sounders. There's just nothing else you can do to prove that this team was. I love the makeup of this team, and
how do you How do you feel about them going into next season? Because this is one of the more fascinating parts of the sport in general, is that making moves or being content with what you have typically means you're going to fall behind. And not just right in the NBA, you feel like the Raptors fell behind a little bit, not because they lost all of their best players, but because there were some other teams that made some really important moves. In the soccer world, it's just making a couple, maybe not groundbreaking, but moves that clearly make your team better. And then the team that just won a trophy and then didn't make any changes is all of a sudden behind the eight ball, or not clearly not the team relative to the rest of the league or the rest of the country, whatever situation you're in, that they were the season prior. So how do you feel about the current roster? What could they do? How do you feel about their chances to contend for one next year? All of those things, wherever you want to go with that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, right, first, this league is always getting better because there are always teams investing to bring in better players. You don't have to do it through the draft. It's not a sort of reverse meritocracy system where you're trying to get parity. Mm-hmm. Anybody can go just improve their team by buying new players. So they're going to be good again. I still am a massive fan of that midfield trio. I think it's still underrated and underappreciated how much of an impact they have on a game, both offensively and defensively. But I don't love their chances of repeating.
Okay.
just because of the parity.
Sure.
Because LAFC is going to be healthy next season. They didn't have their three preferred players on the field practically at all. Toronto's in an interesting spot because Greg Vanney, their manager, stepped down, but that roster is still very, very good. The Union are going to take a small step back with the loss of Brendan Aronson and probably Mark McKenzie, but they're still going to be good. They're good. So they're going to be one of the better teams in the league. I'm really high on Minnesota. That's the team I love next season if they can keep all these pieces intact and get Ike Opara back on the field and Tyler Miller back on the field. They're going to be good. In terms of what they can do to improve, I think the biggest thing is just depth, which feels wrong to say after what Derek Etienne and Aidan Morris did stepping in, but they just don't have a lot of difference makers on that bench. The way that some of on the Seattle side of this, and I talked about it beforehand, what do they do with that starting lineup? Because they have starting caliber players that Brian Smetzer just didn't start. And I said he got it wrong against Minnesota, and it came back to bite him this time around. They didn't get bailed out again when they brought him on in the second half. Columbus doesn't have those kind of players. So now can you find a way to build around this midfield? Gyasi Zardes is a good MLS striker. Pedro Santos had a phenomenal season on the wing. That defense is good. Eloy Room's a good goalkeeper. There's not a and that's ultimately why I love them so much, is there's just no hole in that starting 11. But can you get a couple difference makers off the bench? Can you provide some competition specifically on the wing, maybe to just give some more energy, keep guys feeling like they have to compete for their spot in the starting 11? That's really the only spot that I can see, because they're not going to go sign a Zelarion caliber striker. If you want to know how they get better, I mean, I guess that's probably to me what it is you go get a guy who's going to give you 20, 25 goals a season. They don't have that kind of money.
Right.
They spent their money to build a team capable of winning trophies. That's what they have. So now I think it's just kind of strengthening it where you can. But there's just nobody that I look at and go, they're so good that they're going to win trophy after trophy after trophy. If anybody, it's the Sounders, but the Sounders aren't winning a lot of supporter shields. They just have this ability to show up in the playoffs. But you got some questions to ask now with Brian Smetzer out of contract and after that performance, where as good as he's been, I think he got it wrong. That would be my answers. I just don't think there's that much they can do in the starting 11. But can they find some more pieces? Can Aidan Morris take another step forward so that you really feel good about him as another option in the midfield? Those kind of things.
So a couple of things. One, when you search Columbus Crew on Google, little black and yellow fireworks pop on Google. So that's lit.
That's awesome.
And sort of the last thing to put a cap on the MLS playoffs and MLS Cup. If I told you to pick a team that didn't make the playoffs this season that you think gets, it moves into the playoffs or is even a team that you're looking at to take a massive jump forward, who would it be?
There are so many teams that made the playoffs. That's a hard question. I'll
or a team that just barely made the play-in, or a team that is going to be in a different tier than they were last year.
Sure. Immediately, I'll go to the LA Galaxy first as a team that didn't make the playoffs. It seems like Greg Vanney's going to be their next coach. That's a very good hire. That man obviously wins trophies left and right with Toronto. It sounds like that's where he wants to be. He has his connections. Obviously, he played for the Galaxy. They just can't be much worse, and they're always going to have money to try and outspend their problems.
Sure.
So if they get something to go right signing wise, if Chicharito starts being the player they hope he is, they could easily become a much better team next season. In the East, they barely made the playoffs, but the team I'm curious about next season is Inter Miami.
Okay.
There's rumors that Mesut Ozil may be coming, maybe to the Galaxy, maybe to Inter Miami. He's been linked to DC United in the past. If they can get him pretty cheap, and you pair him with Pizarro and a full season of Gonzalo Higuain, they just couldn't really get everything going this season, but they found a way into the playoffs. Again, they're looking for more stars. They're looking for high-profile guys. I think they could take a step forward and be a top 4 team in the East next season, too. Those would be the two. And I'm curious what DC does. The roster's not quite there yet, but if they make a good hire at manager and spend some money, they could be a factor as well. But I always want to say the Galaxy are going to get better, and they never really do. But maybe they can. If you get a guy who knows how to win an MLS like Greg Vanney, maybe that really helps, and they can figure out how to put these expensive pieces together.
Gotcha. Shouts to the Crew, one of the 6 teams to be multi-time MLS Cup winners. Shouts to the Crew. I told you to give me the Nuggets. The Nuggets don't win championships. Dang it, Doring.
Yeah, I oversold you a little bit there.
A little bit, but I did. It's like you and Lester. I got in before it happened.
That's right. You did.
And I'm just so beautifully ignorant on the subject that you can't call me a bandwagon fan. You're just not allowed to. Coming up next, we'll talk Monday Night Football. What are you watching? We'll do that next. You're watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Welcome back to 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Josh Doring is here with me. Josh, I have a very simple question for you. Is tonight's Monday Night Football game between the Browns and the Ravens the most important football game the Browns have played in 10 years? In terms of, right, they're probably going to make the playoffs regardless. But also, if you win this game, then you're talking about you're 10-3. The Steelers are now 11-2. Now all of a sudden we're talking about a home stretch in which, and you get to play the Steelers to end the season. If you win this game, you're in a position where not only are you about to make it to the playoffs, right, which is something that's been, that momentum has been happening for several weeks now, so that's not new news. But then all of a sudden you're a Browns team that gets to go and play the Jets and the Giants, and then you might be in a position where you're playing Week 17 against the Steelers to win this division. And I don't care. I mean, I don't think there was anybody who really thought the Browns had a real chance to win this division. And if they win this football game tonight, they have a real chance to win this division. So that's, I think that might be the most fascinating part for me. But back to that original question, this has to be the biggest football game that they've played in like a really, really long time.
Right, so we're talking last playoff appearances 2002, right?
Right.
So, by definition, I would think it's got to be the.
It's been almost 20 years since they played an important football game.
They had a couple competent teams in there, but
I mean, so they went right. So but they've only finished over 500 once since they went 10-6, and
that was the Derek Anderson team, right?
I believe so. Yes, Passer Anderson. Yes.
Yes.
So, in the 2007 NFL season, let's see if I can figure out what happened here in terms of the playoff picture. But yes, so not only they've only won more than 7 games twice since that 9-7 team went to the playoffs. So I think the answer has to be yes, that it's the second most important football. Maybe there was an important game in that 2007 year that they lost that would have gotten them into the playoffs. So it's got to be top 3 in the last 20 years.
Probably, yeah. I would say it's definitely the most important game since that season.
So let's actually talk about this football game. Browns, Ravens, Monday Night Football. What are you looking to first when trying to decide who's going to win this game?
Honestly, kind of Lamar Jackson.
Sure. That seems like a fairly legitimate place to start.
Right. Not exactly a bold prediction. Baltimore rushed for 294 yards against Dallas. They were, of course, and they've got the stable of running backs now that you have Mark Ingram back and you draft J.K. Dobbins. And
I got to cut you off here real quick. The Steelers also went 10-6 in 2007, and the Browns lost to the Steelers twice that year. So
there you go.
there it is right there. And the AFC, so the other wild card spots went to the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tennessee Titans, who were also 10-6, but had the better win percentage in common games. So they lost head-to-head. They lost out on the playoffs because of tiebreaker rules, head-to-head record and win percentage in common games. That's tough, and I'm guessing that just means the Titans beat the Steelers at some point that season.
Something like that. So that's one thing is, can Baltimore continue to kick this offense into high gear and pick up this win? Because this is a massive game for both teams. Baltimore's looking at a situation here where. Right, so they're trying to catch the 8-5 Dolphins, who have home against New England, at Las Vegas, and at Buffalo left. The Ravens have home against Jacksonville, home against the Giants, and at Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. If they can win this game, they are on track to make the playoffs.
If they win this game, they're on track to They're on track to having a really respectable 11-5 record. Like right. we're talking about all of a sudden it being, the performance from the Ravens not being all that suspect if they win this game and then go on and win, because then all of a sudden they're an 11-win team, and it doesn't matter how you twist it. That's a good season.
Right. And then the reverse is if they lose, they can't win more than 9 games.
Right.
And the Dolphins have 8 wins, and you get a game against New England. You're not going to rule out them potentially beating Buffalo. They should beat Las Vegas if they're serious about being a playoff team. So this was the other one I was thinking about in terms of the playoff pictures. The end of this thing, it's sort of been the story of Baltimore seasons, right? Is they had all these tough games. I don't think their record is a accurate indication of how good they are, because they've got this front-loaded schedule where the back is the easy part. So you've got and also the reality of playing in the AFC North means you've got 4 games against the Browns and Steelers.
And you don't get home, and your home field advantage just is gone. And I think the Ravens are up there in terms of teams that are just hit the hardest by not having that home field advantage.
Sure. So there are massive ramifications on that side too. I honestly think this game is going to determine whether they make the playoffs or not.
That seems pretty likely. This is also, it's also like the Browns came out and just absolutely crapped the bed at the beginning of this season against Baltimore. The last time these teams played, it was 38-6. Lamar Jackson just went bananas all over this football team, but it's a completely different story this time. Just the optics of this matchup are completely different.
Yeah. And this is a big game for the Browns to really announce their intentions to be more than just a team that gets a wild card and makes a playoff appearances and is happy. Because, if they win this thing, it opens up the potential to win that division if they can beat the Steelers. You want to know the last time Baker Mayfield threw an interception?
I've heard it's been a while.
October 25th.
Well, now he's going to go throw 4 of them because people are talking about how much how mistake free he's been. This is dangerous. But
that's the other thing I'm curious about here is at some point I feel like he's very much in this spot where you can, as are most quarterbacks and practically every coach in any sport with very few exceptions, where you can spin this thing any way you want. I can sit here and tell you why he's a good quarterback and look at what he's done as the season's gone on and look at what he did against the Titans. And you can also spin it the other way and go, yeah, but look at his track record. He's not an elite quarterback. Look at the turnovers he's had throughout his career. You can really fit any narrative you want about Baker Mayfield, and generally because he's Baker Mayfield, people go to the negative one. He's been really solid for most of this season. Can he continue? Is that really who he has become? Or is this just a stretch where he's playing well, they haven't played the best competition, and all of a sudden you start playing these better defenses down the stretch here, and it's gonna go back to he has a 4 turnover game tonight, they lose, and they're still probably gonna make the playoffs. They already have 9 wins, but you've got a real question as to whether they or the Ravens are the better football team if the Ravens win this game convincingly, in my opinion, because of the way that the Ravens schedule is broken.
Sure. I think that's fair. I also think, this is going to come down to, I think this comes down to, as much as the quarterbacks are a part of this, which team is able to run the ball better is going to be a big deal here, whether it's Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, or on the other side, it's the array of ground attack options that the Ravens have. Because I'm not completely sold on either of these guys' ability late in games to make plays with their arms. Right, Lamar. I'm just a Baker Mayfield skeptic. I'm not quite Colin Cowherd, but big football games. I mean, it's not like the offense has been incredible the last few weeks, and there have been times score 10 points against the Texans and manage to win. It doesn't necessarily mean that the offense is great, even if you're not making mistakes. Now, you can't have both. You can't not be good and make mistakes. That's where you get into trouble. But so take that for what it's worth, that he's not making any major mistakes, and that's a good thing. But this year with Lamar Jackson, he just hasn't been great with the ball in the air at many points at all this season. I still have my questions and my skepticism, like I said, when it comes to Baker Mayfield. Whoever has the more efficient ground attack is going to take pressure off of their team's quarterback. And I think that'll go a long way in deciding who is winning this game.
And can the Ravens neutralize Myles Garrett?
Mm.
He's the kind of guy that can absolutely destroy this sort of delicately poised system the Ravens have created.
Right.
If he's constantly in the backfield. But that's also the beauty of having that's why you have a quarterback that can run and is a ridiculously good athlete like Lamar Jackson.
Sure.
You just can you find ways to make Myles Garrett the read on your read options and just take him out of the play more or less, and limit his impact that way. If you're not going to stay in the pocket and really try and throw the ball down the field all that much, his pass rushing isn't as big of an influence in this game. Of course, he can still get there and disrupt the running game just by getting penetration when the Ravens try and run the ball 25, 30, 40 times like they're going to. But can you get it outside of the tackles? Can you get it away from him? Because he's one of these are both good defenses, but it's more defense by committee and just having really good players across the board. He's the one
difference
guy
maker.
Right. He's the one guy that can absolutely determine the outcome of a game, or maybe not determine it, but can really influence the outcome of a game like an Aaron Donald can, like a Chris Jones to a certain extent did for the Chiefs with that play that he made to get that safety. That changed that game. Ultimately, now, it was at a rather insignificant point in the game, but Tony Romo did bring that back up at the end, and that game would have looked different in the last couple of minutes if they wouldn't have gotten that safety. He's that caliber of player. So can he have that kind of impact in this game when his team really needs to win?
Yeah. It's fascinating to me that not only is this game a big deal, but that the Browns are the ones trying to put themselves in a position to win this division, and the Ravens are the team that need to win so that they can then snowball the momentum into barely making the playoffs. It's a fascinating situation that we find ourselves in, especially after what Lamar Jackson and the Ravens did last year and how good he was, and the fact that I just didn't think that would be in week 14 the situation the Ravens were going to find themselves in.
And a lot of that has to do with COVID, and it's that ever fascinating question of what do you actually take away from this season, whatever sport it may be. How much stock do you put? What can we learn from college basketball so far? Other than Gonzaga's really good and Baylor's really good, but now they're not playing anybody.
Right.
What can you take away from this NFL season? What can you take away from this college football season other than Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State, and Alabama are the best 4 teams in the country?
Right.
How do you evaluate this moving forward? And what happens if the Ravens all of a sudden get hot? I want to know if they win these last 4 games. I want no part of them. I don't even feel that bad about the fact that they were my Super Bowl pick, and I haven't really tried to in any way acknowledge that
right
pretty much at any point this season.
Right.
But if they're playing well, they're another team I think could beat the Chiefs. That ceiling is so high because of Lamar Jackson and because of the talent they have. But at the same time, I don't think they're making the playoffs if they don't win this game.
Right.
And like you said, the idea that the Browns are not the hopeful upstarts. They're the team trying to cement themselves in the upper echelon of the NFL.
Yeah.
It's just it's one of those things that you can encapsulate 2020 with. The Browns are a 9-3 football team.
And still nobody's completely sold on them.
Right.
What are you watching tonight?
This game, obviously, I'm really intrigued by, just because of the stakes, of the fact that it's the Browns, and the Ravens are just an inherently fun team to watch. The other game I'll throw out there is Marquette Creighton.
Yep.
In the Big East.
Yep.
This Marquette team is really intriguing to me. It's another good test for Creighton, who've only had one so far, and they passed it. They ultimately didn't beat Kansas, but they showed up.
Yep.
Those are the 2 things I'm paying attention to tonight.
I think those are I will be paying attention to both of those as well. I will continue to keep a half of an eye on the NBA preseason just because I'm, seeing some of these guys. I talked about this on Friday. Just because you don't get Summer League and you're seeing all of these rookies for the very first time, I'm still just, my curiosity is still there to a point where I'm willing to, flip through a couple of these preseason games, whether it be the Suns, getting to see what they're doing, whether it be the Bucks, whether it be LaMelo Ball or whoever it might be, and the Grizzlies play tonight, so I'll probably flip through that as well. I believe, though, that we've run out of things to talk about, and that's a good thing because it's about time for the show to be over. Thank you so much for joining us.
Is that how it's supposed to work?
I think so. I think that at least that's the rumor. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of 110 Daily. Whether you're watching on Twitter, Twitch, the website, or listening in on-demand form, very much appreciate you making 110 Sports part of your Monday. Chris and Josh will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. I'll be back on Wednesday, but thank you so much for joining us on this Monday morning. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning.